The screaming stopped at exactly 3:47 a.m. But the silence that followed was worse. Silence in these mountains has a way of cutting through the bones. Not the gentle quiet of sleep, but the heavy, suffocating hush of something ancient pressing its hand over the mouth of the world. In Harlan County, Kentucky, dogs howled until dawn that night, their voices rising like a chorus of warnings. You weren't supposed to hear what happened in those woods. You weren't supposed to know what happened inside Copperhead Hollow. But tonight, you will. Picture the Cumberland Mountains before the first light of morning. Mist curls low over the ridgelines, clinging like breath from something enormous and unseen. The air is thick with coal dust, rotting leaves, and the copper tang of water that should never be touched. This place has always kept its secrets buried, not just in the ground but in the families who live here. Men once said the mines carved open the veins of the earth, but what they didn't say was that some veins ran darker than coal, some veins bled people. Copperhead Hollow, population 43. At least, that's what the census claimed, though everyone in the county knew the number never stayed the same. You see, the hollow kept its own records, and they were carved in scars, in screams, in bones buried shallow where the earth was too tired to hide them. At the dead end of a gravel road the county stopped maintaining in the 1960s, the McCready family built their compound. Trailers, lean-tos, makeshift shacks that seemed to grow out of the mud like fungi after rain. And inside those walls, generation after generation twisted together until their bloodlines no longer looked like anything God ever designed. You've heard of backwoods clans. You've heard the jokes, the stereotypes, the whispered stories about mountain inbreeding. But what grew here wasn't a joke. It wasn't Eve. One human neglect. What grew here was an ecosystem of control, of hunger, of a family bending itself into something entirely different from civilization. Think of a tree that stopped reaching for the sky and instead began curling back into itself, forming knots, gnarls, a monstrous tangle of roots feeding on rot. That was the McCready family tree, and like all living things, it needed to feed. The first time the outside world caught a glimpse was in 1981. A social worker named Margaret Finley tried to enroll some of the McCready children in school. Her report, buried by her supervisor and buried again by the sheriff, spoke of children who moved like shadows, who flinched from every adult except their own kin, who bore the same identical features though their paperwork called them cousins. She described fear, deep and instinctive, not the kind of fear that comes from poverty, but the kind that comes from ritual, generational, inherited fear, like they'd been taught from the cradle that the world beyond Copperhead Hollow was poison. And maybe they weren't wrong. Margaret's report went nowhere. In Appalachia there's a phrase, mountain families got their ways. The sheriff knew better than to poke the McCreadys. Ezekiel McCready, patriarch, preacher of his own gospel, and self-declared keeper of the old ways, had fed half the county with his moonshine during lean winters. He had friends in law enforcement, men who owed him favors, men who remembered that a man who fills your belly in a starving season becomes more than a neighbor. He becomes a god. So the McCreadys were untouchable, unchecked, and their hollow grew darker. Animals avoided their land. Hunters swore the deer trails bent away from the McCready property, like the forest itself had learned what humans refused to see. The creek that wound past their trailers turned murky, heavy with sediment, though geologists later testified that no natural source explained it. And then there were the sounds. Neighbors heard them in the night, not quite human, not quite animal, something in between, echoing off the ridges, echoes that made you lock your doors and whisper prayers you hadn't said in years. But you want to know what happened the night the silence fell. October 13th, 1982. That's when Deputy Michael Torres drove into Copperhead Hollow. He thought he was answering a call about gunshots. He thought he was doing his job. What he found was something no academy could prepare him for. You see, Torres stepped into a place where the rules of the outside world meant nothing. Law meant nothing. Civilization meant nothing. And for the first time in his career, Torres realized what true power was. Not the badge on his chest, but the family at the end of that road. A family who had rewritten the rules of survival, of hunger, of kinship itself. A family who had turned their bloodline into a weapon. And that's where you need to start paying attention. because this isn't just about one twisted Appalachian fawn, Millie. This is about how silence protects power, how communities choose blindness when truth feels too dangerous, and how institutions, the police, the courts, the schools, will bury 100 bodies if it means keeping their own structures intact. What happened in Copperhead Hollow isn't an isolated horror, it's a mirror. And if you dare to keep listening, you'll begin to see how that mirror reflects far beyond Kentucky, into your life, your society, and the systems that tell you who to be. The dogs stopped howling at dawn, but the hunger in Copperhead Hollow never did. The gravel cracked under Deputy Torres's boots as he stepped out of his cruiser. His breath came in sharp bursts, visible in the mountain air, but the cold wasn't what made his hands tremble. It was the smell. That heavy sweetness that clung to the hollow like perfume rotting into poison. Not wood smoke, not animal decay. This was something else, something learned to hide behind the face of poverty, something dressed in rust and dust but older, more deliberate. Torres had spent a decade on the force, seen meth labs that looked like death itself, homes where starvation had hollowed out children to skeletons. But this felt different. It felt rehearsed. It felt ritual. His flashlight caught movement, shadows darting back from the beam with unnatural speed, slipping behind rusted-out cars, stacks of rotting lumber, sagging porches. Then, 3 children emerged. Torres froze. They were barefoot, even in the cold. Their ages were impossible to pin down. Malnourished bodies shrank them, but their eyes, dark, sharp, predatory, belonged to something far older. They didn't run. They didn't cry. They watched. The oldest girl, hair tangled and matted into ropes, finally spoke. Her voice was thick with dialect, her words slow, measured, far too calm. "Ain't supposed to be here after dark." That was all. Not a threat, not a plea, a statement of law. The kind of law that had nothing to do with the badge on Torres's chest. It was the kind of law that gets written in blood, passed down across generations until even children know it by heart. Granddaddy's law. He tried to soften his voice, tried to play the role of protector. "I'm Deputy Torres. I'm just checking on some reports. Gunfire. Want to make sure everyone's safe." But even as he spoke, he could feel it. His words meant nothing here. These children weren't impressed by authority. They didn't recognize it. They had grown up inside a closed system where one man's will defined reality. Outside power couldn't penetrate, and that is the truth most men never face. Authority is only as real as the people who believe in it. Step inside the wrong domain, and your badge, your gun, your rules dissolve like smoke. The girl tilted her chin toward the largest trailer, a sagging double-wide, its frame bent like a broken spine, light leaking through torn curtains. From inside came the sound of clinking utensils, low voices, laughter. A family dinner. For a moment, Torres thought maybe the reports had been exaggerated. Maybe this was just a poor family living poor lives. But then the sound stopped. Instantly. Utter silence. It wasn't the silence of people surprised by a knock on the door. It was the silence of a switch being thrown. Trained silence. Practiced silence. Torres's hand hovered near his service weapon, not drawing it yet, but ready. His training screamed that he should call for backup, but backup was 40 minutes away. 40 minutes of winding mountain roads, black as a mine shaft, where anything could happen. He knocked on the trailer door. Slow footsteps answered from within, each one deliberate, like the floorboards themselves were being used as a drum to announce presence, to build anticipation. Then the door opened. Ezekiel McCready, patriarch. The old arrest photos didn't do him justice. Time had carved his face into something harder than stone, something less than human. His smile revealed teeth filed to points. Filed, not chipped, not broken, altered, chosen, a mark of transformation. Behind him stretched a long wooden table, and the air wafted rich with the smell of meat and fat, heavy and cloying. The table was set, steaming bowls, gleaming utensils, but the family members around it, they didn't move. Forks frozen mid-air, faces locked in unnatural stillness, except for their eyes. Every eye followed Torres with the same unblinking hunger. Predators pretending to be people. Even in Deputy, Ezekiel said, his voice low, smooth, almost kind. "Bit late for social calls, ain't it?" And with that one line, Torres understood. This wasn't his ground. This wasn't his story. This was Ezekiel's world, and the Deputy was a guest who hadn't been invited. Civilization had ended the moment Torres stepped into that hollow. Now he was breathing in someone else's law. He cleared his throat. "Reports of shots fired, just making sure everything's all right." His voice cracked on "all right," and he cursed himself for it. The family's eyes twitched in unison, as though they'd heard something more than weakness in his tone, like they'd smelled it. Predators always know. Ezekiel's filed teeth glinted in the light. "Safe as houses, Deputy. Just a little night hunting. These mountains, they're full of things that only come out after dark." His smile widened, and something in Torres's stomach sank. He realized Ezekiel wasn't answering him. He was testing him, testing how much fear the Deputy could hide, testing whether he'd play along with the lie. Because in that moment, the lie was the only thing keeping him alive. And then Torres saw it. Half buried behind the trailer, a child's bicycle. Purple, frame, silver streamers, still spinning in the night wind. Recognition hit him like a fist. 6 months earlier, a girl named Amy Chen had disappeared from Pine Mountain. Her missing posters had papered half the county. The bicycle was hers. The hollow had swallowed her. And suddenly, Torres knew. This wasn't poverty. This wasn't neglect. This was hunting. Organized. Generational. Refined. The McCreaties weren't victims of isolation. They were predators who had learned how to use isolation as camouflage. Every instinct screamed at him to draw his weapon, to call back up, to run. But another instinct, deeper and older, told him the truth. None of those things would matter, not here, because the hollow had its own rules, its own rituals, and tonight Torres had stepped into them. Torres's breath clouded in front of him as the hollow tightened its grip. He knew what he had seen. Amy Chen's bicycle, the silver streamers fluttering in the night breeze like little hands waving for help. But what gnawed at him wasn't just the evidence of a missing girl. It was the feeling that he hadn't discovered anything. No, he had been shown, placed where he would see it, lured into the web the same way a moth is drawn to flame. Ezekiel's eyes never left him. Those sharpened teeth, that calm grin. It wasn't bravado, it was ownership. Torres wasn't standing as an equal on that porch. He was standing like prey that hadn't yet figured out the game. Behind Ezekiel, the long table gleamed under weak light. The feast was laid out as though they were waiting for someone important. Bowls steamed, platters glistened with meat whose texture wasn't quite right. Too dark, too sinewy. The family sat with their forks halfway lifted, bodies rigid, as if frozen in the act of eating. But every eye tracked him, unblinking, silent, patient. The silence pressed harder than any words. It wasn't emptiness. It was performance. They were showing him, displaying the ritual of a family dinner that wasn't a dinner at all. Torres had seen predators freeze like that in the wild, holding themselves motionless until their prey looked away. This wasn't poverty. This wasn't starvation. This was calculation. He forced his voice steady. "We've had calls. Gunfire in the hollow. I need to confirm no one's hurt." His hand brushed the butt of his weapon again, fingers damp with sweat. He didn't want to draw it, not yet. You never draw unless you're willing to shoot. And in that room, with a dozen pairs of eyes watching, Torres wasn't sure he'd make it past the first trigger pull. Ezekiel leaned in the doorway, broad shoulders blocking most of the room. His shadow swallowed Torres's light. "Sir, Afer's houses, Deputy. Ain't no hurt here." His tongue ran across those filed points. "We hunt at night, old ways. You understand?" Old ways. The phrase struck something deep. A phrase Torres remembered from an anthropology course long ago. In isolated tribes, the old ways often meant rituals outsiders would never accept. Sacrifice, cannibalism, communion with something older than Christianity ever dreamed. Old ways meant rules that predated civilization, rules you couldn't fight with a badge or a gun. Behind Ezekiel, a boy shifted. Thin arms, ragged shirt, face pale but eyes sharp. Sharp in a way that chilled Torres. The boy's lips parted but no sound came out. Still, Torres could read the word. Run. Just one word shaped silently. And then, almost instantly, the boy's head snapped toward Ezekiel, a flicker of fear across his face before he lowered his eyes and froze again. The message landed like ice in Torres's chest. There were victims here, yes, but not all of them were outsiders. Some of the children, the ones born into the bloodline, were prisoners in their own family, controlled, shaped, conditioned into silence. And what better prison exists than one where the jailer is your own kin, where loyalty has been welded into your bones since birth? Ezekiel stepped further onto the porch, closing the space between them. You smell it, don't you? His grin widened. Not the food, the fear. It clings to these hills. Folks out there call it superstition, but it ain't. Fear's the oldest law there is. Fear makes men obey. His eyes flicked to Torres's badge. You know that better than most, don't you? And Torres realized the truth. Ezekiel was right. His whole career, he had enforced order not with reason, not with law, but with fear of punishment, fear of authority, fear of consequence. Strip away the paperwork and the uniforms, and the sheriff's office wasn't that different from the McCready clan. Just two systems of control built on fear. One had the state seal, the other had blood. The night wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that turned Torres's stomach. A low, humming chant, soft, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby, drifting from one of the outbuildings. The family at the table did not react, but Torres's ears caught it. A children's song sung in voices too young to know the weight of the words. The melody pulled at something primal, tugged at the edges of thought. He blinked hard, fighting the drowsiness creeping in. That's when he understood. This is how they lured their prey. He had read once about the Sawney Bean clan in Scotland, a family of cannibals who ambushed travelers for decades. Historians said it was an exaggeration, a folk tale to scare children. But looking into Ezekiel's sharpened grin, hearing the lullaby in the night, Torres understood the sick truth. The McCreaties weren't folklore. They were proof that some stories don't die. They just change names, change ridgelines, change centuries. A sharp knock of wood axion. Whence metal startled him. He turned just in time to see another child. This one younger, face streaked with soot, dragging a rusted axe handle across the hood of his patrol car. Slowly, scraping. The metallic screech cut through the hollow like a warning. Behind him, the family at the table began to move again. Not eating, not speaking, just shifting, eyes fixed, forks rising and lowering in unison like some grotesque pantomime. Torres's radio crackled at his side. For a heartbeat, hope surged. Backup, a voice, anything. But what came through wasn't dispatch. It was static, twisted into something that almost sounded like breathing. Then, faint, distorted words. You're not leaving, Michael. His stomach dropped. No one on dispatch knew his first name. He hadn't used it on the line, which meant the voice wasn't coming from dispatch at all. It was coming from here, from the hollow. And that's when the last illusion shattered. This wasn't poverty. This wasn't dysfunction. This was a system, a self-contained world where every child was trained, every silence rehearsed, every ritual sharpened. Copperhead Hollow wasn't just a family. It was a machine, a predator engine. And Torres had just stepped into its gears. The hollow had gone quiet again. That crushing, deliberate silence that made Torres feel like the night itself was listening. His hand hovered near his gun, but he didn't draw. Not yet. He knew instinctively that a bullet here wasn't a weapon. It was an invitation. You fire, you declare war. And in Copperhead Hollow, war meant playing by their rules, on their ground. The door behind Ezekiel creaked open wider, and for the first time Torres saw her, the matriarch. She moved slowly, not with weakness but with the weight of command. Bent-backed, wrapped in shawls made of stitched animal hides, her hair a stringy curtain of grey that brushed the table as she walked. Her eyes were pale and cloudy, but they didn't wander. They fixed directly on Torres with the precision of a hawk. Blindness? No. Something else. Sight that wasn't of this world. The family at the table reacted to her like iron filings to a magnet. Forks lowered in perfect unison, heads bowed. Even Ezekiel shifted, his grin dimming as though a greater power had entered the room. Torres realized with a sick twist in his stomach. Ezekiel wasn't the true ruler here. He was the mouthpiece, the teeth, the hammer. But the hand that swung it belonged to her. "Child," the matriarch rasped, her voice a brittle whisper that carried farther than it should have. "Why you bring the law into my house?" Torres straightened, forcing steel into his voice. "We've had reports of gunfire, missing children. I need to—" She raised one gnarled hand, and the words died in his throat. Not because of fear, but because something pressed. A heaviness, a weight that seemed to settle on his chest, crushing the air from his lungs. He coughed, staggered, blinked, and for a moment the room spun. When it cleared, she was closer. Too close. Her wrinkled face hovered inches from his, though she hadn't moved across the floor. Her breath smelled of earth and iron, her lips cracked but wet as if she had been drinking. "Gunfire, missing children," she mimicked, her voice rising in mocking cadence. "You think them your business, they ours. Born here, buried here. You don't take from the hollow." Her lips peeled back, revealing gum stained black. "The hollow takes from you." Torres's pulse hammered in his ears. He stumbled back, his boot crunching against something on the porch. He glanced down. A necklace of bones. Small bones. Finger bones. Strung together with twine and darkened with age. His stomach lurched, bile burning his throat. Inside, the family began to hum. Low, guttural, like a hive of bees stirring awake. The sound vibrated in his chest cavity, crawling under his skin. He realized the chant wasn't random. It was synchronized. A rhythm that carried from one body to the next, binding them together like a single organism. The Makritis weren't individuals. They were cells in a body, and that body had one brain, one heart, one will, the matriarch's. Torres gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus. "Where's Amy Chen?" His voice cracked but rose above the hum. "The girl who disappeared. Where is she?" For the first time, the family moved. All at once, every head turned toward the far wall of the trailer. Slowly, precisely, as if choreographed. Torres's flashlight followed their gaze. At first he saw nothing but peeling wallpaper. Then he noticed it, the outline of a door, not a real door, a hatch, low, bolted. The humming grew louder, pressing against his skull like a migraine. Ezekiel leaned in close, whispering through sharpened teeth. "You don't want to open that, deputy. You open it, you ain't never closing it again." Torres swallowed, throat dry. But he couldn't look away from that hatch. His instincts screamed the truth. Amy was behind it. Maybe alive. Maybe worse. But if he left without opening it, she would vanish forever. The matriarch's voice cracked the air. "She is ours. A gift. Every few years the hollow must feed. Else it withers. Else it dies. We keep it alive with blood. That's why folk fear this place. That's why they don't come at night." Her pale eyes blazed, though sightless. "And now you will keep it alive too." Torres's hand snapped to his weapon. This time he drew, the gun leveled at Ezekiel's chest, finger trembling on the trigger. "Move. Away from the hatch." The family didn't flinch. Not one. They didn't scream, didn't cower, didn't rise in anger. They just sat, humming, eyes fixed, forks still in their hands. The sound built like a swarm. Torres's head pounded, his vision blurred at the edges, his finger tightened, and then the boy again, the same one who had mouthed "run." He slipped from his chair, crawling along the floor like an animal. His eyes met Torres's. This time his lips shaped different words. "Don't let her hear." The warning slammed into Torres's brain like lightning. Don't let who hear? The matriarch? Or something worse, something that Hatch kept bound? He blinked sweat from his eyes. His radio crackled again, the same distorted static as before. But this time the words were clear, a child's voice. Amy's. "Help me." The matriarch's head snapped toward the sound, though the radio was clipped to Torres's shoulder. She hissed, and for the first time, fear flickered across her ancient face. The hum faltered just for a moment. And that was when Torres knew. The radio wasn't interference. It was a signal. Someone, or something inside that hatch was trying to speak through him. The matriarch raised both arms, bones clattering from her shawl. The family rose as one, dozens of forks, knives, and jagged tools glinting in the light. The humming surged to a roar, shaking the walls, rattling the plates, vibrating Torres's teeth. He backed toward the hatch, gun leveled, breath ragged. His training screamed he was about to die. His instincts whispered something worse. He was about to belong. The hollow didn't just kill, it absorbed. And the matriarch was smiling. The hum rattled the air until it felt like the walls themselves would split apart. Torres stood with his back against the hidden hatch, gun aimed into a sea of faces that weren't afraid of bullets. They didn't blink. They didn't breathe like normal people. They just waited, mouths closed, hum vibrating from deep inside their throats, as though the entire family shared a single lung. He shouted over the roar, voice breaking, "Stay back! I'll shoot!" But his words were eaten by the sound, swallowed whole before they could reach human ears. The matriarch raised her hands higher, her shawl falling open to reveal bones sewn into her skin. Not jewelry, not decoration, stitched directly into flesh. Collarbones, rib fragments, tiny finger joints, all embedded in her arms and chest. Torres gagged, bile burning up the back of his throat. This woman had worn her dead, made them part of her body. She wasn't a relic of the hollow, she was its living altar. Her voice pierced the chant. "You hear her, don't you? The girl. She calls through you. The hollow let you carry her cry, but it ain't a gift, it's a chain. Means you can't leave." Her pale eyes flared white, her voice dropping into a guttural rasp. "You're part of it now." The boy crouched near the floor. The one who had mouthed warnings before pressed his hands over his ears. His lips shaped frantic words Torres could barely catch. "Don't open it. Don't listen. Please." His body shook, caught between terror of his family and something far worse behind that hatch. Torres's mind spiraled. His training offered him nothing here. Procedure didn't cover ancient matriarchs stitched with bones or humming families bound in ritual. His badge felt like a toy. His gun felt like a stick in a storm. But the radio crackled again. Amy's voice, clear as day. "Help me, please. It's dark." And then a second voice layered over hers. Older, female, cold. "Open it." Torres's heart stopped. Two voices, one desperate, one commanding, both clawing through static like nails on metal. He stared down at the hatch beneath his feet, the bolts slick with rust. His body screamed not to touch it. His soul screamed he had no choice. The humming surged, every fork and knife in the room lifting in perfect rhythm, like the entire family was preparing for communion. Their eyes glowed in the flashlight beam, not reflecting but shining from within, as though something burned inside them. Ezekiel stepped forward, teeth gleaming. "You open that door, deputy. You don't just let her out. You let it out. And it ain't never satisfied. Been fed for generations and still it hungers. You ain't got enough bullets for hunger." Torres's gun wavered. Sweat ran into his eyes, stinging, blurring the sight picture. His breath came in shallow bursts. He thought of Amy's parents, their faces on the missing posters. He thought of every late-night call he had answered as an officer, every vow to protect and serve. Was it worth dying here? Dying for a girl who might already be gone? The matriarch's voice slithered between the hums. "Choose, child. Law or life. Open, and you join us. Close, and you leave her to the dark." And that was the truth. The hollow didn't offer justice. It offered bargains. Sacrifice one life to save yourself, or sacrifice yourself to maybe save another. The boy crawled closer, tugging at Torres's pant leg. His whisper was urgent now, his lips trembling. "If you open it, she hears you. She marks you. You'll never leave, not even in death." His small hand clutched Torres's boot like an anchor. The radio spat static. Amy again. "Please, please, I can't breathe." Then silence. Torres's knees buckled. He dropped into a crouch, the gun still leveled, and reached for the hatch. His fingers wrapped around the cold bolt. Rust flaked off, staining his palm like dried blood. The family stilled. The hum cut off. The silence was worse than the roar. Dozens of bodies frozen mid-breath, eyes locked on his hand, the entire hollow holding its breath. He pulled. The first bolt squealed loose. The matriarch shrieked, a sound too large for her brittle frame, a sound that shook the boards under his feet. The family fell into convulsions, forks clattering against the table, mouths opening wide in perfect unison. A low moan erupted from their throats, deeper than human voices should go, vibrating the glass in the trailer windows. Torres yanked the second bolt. Metal screamed. Ezekiel lunged, but the boy, that small, trembling boy, hurled himself into his father's legs, knocking him sideways. Ezekiel crashed into the table, dishes shattering, stew splashing like blood across the floor. Torres tore the final bolt loose. His hand gripped the hatch handle. He paused, his body shaking with terror. The air around him pressed heavy, as if the hollow itself leaned down, waiting. And then he pulled. The hatch groaned open. Darkness poured out. Not the absence of light. A thickness, a living black that seemed to crawl over the floor, swallowing shadows and making them whole. The radio on his shoulder shrieked, Amy's voice howling in pain, layered with laughter, layered with 1,000 whispers that all carried his name. Torres staggered back as the first hand reached out. Small, childlike, fingers bruised, nails broken. Amy. She clawed at the wood, eyes wide, mouth opening in a silent scream. But behind her was something else. A shape too large for the hatch, pressed against the dark like a face against glass. Pale skin stretched thin over bone, eyes like lanterns in the void. Its grin was wider than any human jaw could allow, and it was grinning at him. The matriarch collapsed to her knees, arms raised high, voice shrieking in triumph. "The hollow is fed!" Torres screamed, firing blindly into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit the trailer in bursts, carving the grinning face into existence and then snatching it away again. But the bullets vanished into the black, swallowed whole. The hand of the girl reached higher, clawing at his chest. Her eyes pleaded, her lips moved. One word: run. Behind her, the thing moved closer. The grin widened, and Torres understood the truth. The girl wasn't begging him to save her. She was begging him not to join her. The hollow hadn't taken Amy Chen. It had become her, and now it wanted him. The thing in the hatch pressed forward, its face flattening against the black as though the dark itself were elastic skin. Amy's hand clawed higher, nails scraping his chest, her mouth shaping the word again, run. But Torres's body wouldn't obey. His legs locked, his breath hitched, his gun hung useless in his grip. The matriarch's shriek rose above the chaos. It knows you now. It marks you. There ain't no leaving once it breathes your name. And then he heard it. From the dark behind Amy, 1,000 whispers, layered and discordant, spilling into the room like smoke. Michael, Michael. His name in voices that weren't human. Men, women, children, some sobbing, some laughing, all speaking at once. Torres stumbled back, slamming into the wall. His vision tunneled, the edges of the room blurring. He fired again and again into the hatch, but the bullets vanished, swallowed like drops of water in a furnace. The grinning face didn't flinch. If anything, it widened. The boy who had warned him, the only flicker of defiance in that house, grabbed Torres's arm. His small hands tugged with desperate strength. "Move! Now!" Torres's instincts finally kicked in. His body lurched into motion. He tore himself away from the hatch, vaulted off the porch, boots skidding in the gravel. The boy ran beside him, bare feet slapping the ground, breath ragged. Behind them, the family erupted. Chairs toppled, dishes shattered, bodies surged out the door. But it wasn't a human chase. They moved in unison, dozens of feet striking the earth at the same instant, a stampede with one mind. Their voices rose into a single howl that made the night bleed. Torres sprinted for his cruiser, every nerve on fire. The boy clung to his arm, dragging him toward the only hope of escape. The trees loomed ahead, skeletal and clawing, branches rattling like bone against bone. He reached the car, yanked the door open, and shoved the boy inside. His hands shook so badly he fumbled the keys. Behind him, the howling surged closer, a flicker in the corner of his eye. Ezekiel, sprinting on all fours like a beast, teeth flashing in the moonlight. Torres jammed the key into the ignition, twisted. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Relief surged, but it lasted only a heartbeat. The headlights flared and illuminated a wall of faces. The family. Dozens of them standing shoulder to shoulder across the dirt road, eyes glowing, mouths slack. The light didn't scare them. It made them stiller, more certain. As if the car wasn't a threat at all, but part of the plan. The boy screamed, "Go! Just go!" Torres floored it. The cruiser tore forward, gravel spraying. He braced for impact, for the sickening thud of bodies breaking. But when the headlights hit them, the family was gone, vanished. The road ahead was empty. Torres gripped the wheel, heart pounding, sweat blinding his eyes. He slammed the gas, the cruiser lurching up the winding mountain path. The boy crouched in the seat, trembling, whispering something Torres could barely hear over the engine. "It follows, always follows." The radio hissed. Static poured from the speaker, twisting into Amy's voice again, but this time it wasn't desperate, it was playful. Mocking. "You can't leave, Michael. You're one of us now." "Shut up!" Torres screamed, ripping the radio from its mount and hurling it into the passenger footwell. The boy flinched, but the voice kept coming, louder, vibrating through the cruiser's frame. "Michael! Michael!" The headlights cut a sharp bend in the road. For a moment Torres saw the hollow spread below, the sagging trailers, the rotting cars, the crooked sheds. But something else was moving there now. A ripple. The ground itself seemed to writhe, dark tendrils stretching up from the soil, curling like fingers. The mountain shook. Gravel rattled loose down the cliffs. Torres's hands clenched the wheel. "Hold on!" he shouted, though he wasn't sure if it was to the boy or himself. They rounded another bend, and the road ahead was blocked. A woman stood in the headlights. The matriarch. Her shawl dragged the dirt, her pale eyes staring through the glass. Her arms spread wide, bones gleaming in her flesh. The cruiser's engine roared, but Torres's foot froze on the brake. His body betrayed him, muscles seizing under invisible weight. The boy screamed, clawing at Torres's arm. "Don't stop, don't look at her!" But Torres couldn't move. His eyes locked to hers. His limbs were stone. The cruiser slowed, tires skidding, engine whining. The matriarch's lips curled into a grin. She mouthed something, one word. "Home." Torres tore his gaze away with a scream and slammed his foot on the gas. The cruiser surged forward. For a split second the headlights lit her body. And then it wasn't there. Just empty road. But in the rearview mirror the boy's face went white. "She's inside," he whispered. Torres glanced back. The matriarch sat in the back seat, her shawl spread across the vinyl, bones clattering softly, pale eyes fixed on him. The smell of rot filled the cabin. Torres jerked the wheel, the cruiser swerving, dangerously close to the cliff's edge. "Get out!" he screamed. But the boy was frozen, pressed against the door, eyes wide with terror. The matriarch leaned forward, her lips brushing Torres's ear. Her whisper slid into his skull like a knife. "The hollow don't let go, child. You've breathed its air. You've heard its song. You belong." Torres's vision blurred. His hands slipped on the wheel. The road twisted ahead, but he couldn't see it, couldn't feel it. The world tilted sideways, and then, in the last flicker of his consciousness, he heard the family's hum rising again. Not from the hollow, not from the road, but from inside the cruiser. A vibration under the seats, in the dashboard, in his chest cavity. The car itself had become part of it. The boy's scream was the last human sound. Then the cruiser veered off the cliff. It plummeted into the black, swallowed by the same silence that had waited all along. When the cruiser left the edge of the cliff, gravity should have claimed it. Steel should have twisted, glass should have shattered, bones should have broken. That is what physics demanded. That is what the world outside Copperhead Hollow would expect. But the hollow does not answer to physics. Torres braced for impact, the kind that cracks vertebrae and silences everything in a single violent second. Instead, there was nothing. No crash, no pain, no sound but the steady hum he had heard since stepping foot inside Ezekiel's trailer. The boy was gone. The matriarch was gone. The cruiser floated in darkness, headlights swallowed whole. Torres's stomach dropped, but not with speed, with realization. He was no longer on the mountain road. He was somewhere else. The car drifted down, like a coffin lowered on ropes. Shadows pressed against the windows, shifting in human shapes. Some were children, some were adults. Their faces emerged for a heartbeat, then dissolved into smoke. One face lingered longer than the rest. Amy Chen. Her eyes were hollow now, her mouth smeared with dark stains. She smiled through the glass, whispering words he couldn't hear but understood. "We keep what we take." The cruiser settled on solid ground. The hum ceased. The silence returned. Torres gripped the steering wheel, forcing himself to breathe. He turned the key. Nothing. The car was dead. Not just broken. Hollowed. Slowly he opened the door. The air smelled of damp stone and rust. He was underground. A cavern stretched before him, lit by torches wedged into cracks along the walls. The flames burned without smoke, their light revealing a floor scattered with bones. Not random bones, arranged bones. Circles, spirals, symbols that pulsed faintly as if alive. Torres stepped out, his boots crunching against a skull. He froze. The cavern walls weren't natural. They had been carved. Generati. Ions of hands had widened this place, smoothing its sides, inscribing it with symbols that didn't belong to any culture he recognized. Then he heard the voices. Not whispers this time. Chants. Low, rhythmic, rising from tunnels branching off the cavern. Footsteps echoed, dozens of them converging. Torres raised his gun, though he knew it was useless. From the shadows, the family emerged. Ezekiel first, teeth filed into points, his rifle slung across his shoulder like a king bearing his scepter. The matriarch beside him, shawl dragging, bones clattering. Then the others, men, women, children, all stepping into the circle of bones. Their eyes gleamed with hunger. Torres spun, trying to find an opening, but the cavern had closed behind him. The way back wasn't there anymore. Ezekiel spread his arms. Brothers, sisters, tonight the hollow breathes anew. The chant surged. The family pounded their fists against the walls, the sound reverberating like the heartbeat of a living beast. The matriarch lifted a hand and silence fell. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the cavern like a blade. "You thought you were hunting us, lawman, but you were the offering. The mountain always takes its due, and you are ripe." Torres aimed his weapon at her head. "Stay back." Ezekiel laughed. Not the laugh of amusement, but of certainty. "Shoot if you want. The hollow don't bleed." Torres fired. The bullet hit Ezekiel's chest and vanished. Not deflected, not ricocheted. It dissolved. Ezekiel's smile widened, bloodless, eternal. The matriarch extended her hand. "Give me the badge, Michael." His breath caught. He hadn't told them his name. He hadn't told them anything. Yet she spoke it like she had known it before his birth. "Give it," she repeated, her pale eyes gleaming. "The hollow don't care for the laws of men. Trade it, and maybe it'll let you live." The family closed in, bodies swaying in rhythm, their chant returning, thicker now. Torres clutched the badge pinned to his chest. For the first time in his career, it felt like nothing. A scrap of metal, a toy. He thought of Amy's bicycle. He thought of the children's shoes neatly lined in rows. He thought of the boy who had tried to help him. Gone, like he had never existed. The badge burned against his chest. He tore it free and hurled it into the circle of bones. It landed with a clang. The chant stopped. The torches flared higher. The cavern trembled. The family exhaled in one breath, a sigh of satisfaction. The matriarch smiled. "Now you are ours." Torres fell to his knees. His gun slipped from his hand. His body felt heavy, sluggish, as if the very air was congealing in his veins. The family surrounded him, their shadows stretching long against the cavern walls. Ezekiel knelt, his filed teeth gleaming inches from Torres's face. "Don't fight it, lawman. Ain't no fight to win. We've been here longer than your laws, longer than your state, longer than your God. We'll be here after. You don't end a root by cutting its branch. You burn the whole mountain, and no one ever burns the mountain." The chant returned, louder, faster. The bones on the floor rattled, the symbols pulsed brighter. The matriarch stepped closer. She placed her skeletal hands on Torres's head. The touch was ice. Her whisper burrowed into his ear. Breathe deep. Let the hollow in, and it will never let you die. The cavern roared, his vision blurred, his chest convulsed, and with his last thread of willpower, Michael Torres realized the most terrifying truth of all. The Macretes weren't feeding on flesh. They were feeding on identity. The hollow didn't just eat bodies, it ate names, it ate selves, it swallowed people whole and left their shells to walk, to hunt, to chant, generation after generation. The badge was gone, his name was slipping, and in its place, something else was crawling in. The cavern pulsed like a living organ. The chant rose higher, echoing until Torres couldn't tell whether the sound came from the family's mouths or from inside his skull. His body shook with each syllable, muscles twitching in rhythm to words he didn't understand but somehow knew. The matriarch's hand remained on his head, her fingers curling gently as though cradling him. "It's begun," she whispered. "The hollow writes its name through you now." Torres tried to speak, to say his own name, to anchor himself, but the sound that left his throat was not his voice. It was a guttural rasp, ancient, layered with echoes of other voices. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds. The family swayed around him, chanting faster, eyes locked on him like worshippers witnessing a miracle. Ezekiel leaned in, his filed teeth gleaming, and hissed, "Breathe it in, lawman. You're one of us now." Torres's vision blurred. The cavern's torches warped into streaks of light, his memories scattered like ash in a storm. Amy's face flickered, her bicycle, her desperate hand clawing at him from the hatch, then dissolved. His mother's voice, his academy graduation, his first day in uniform, all unraveling. In their place came new images, memories that weren't his. He saw himself barefoot, running through the woods at night, howling with laughter as blood dripped down his chin. He saw himself kneeling in this cavern, chanting in a language his tongue had never known, but his body remembered. He saw himself dragging bodies into the pit, stripping them of their names, their memories, until they were hollow husks, fit only to join the circle. Torres staggered back, clutching his skull. "No, this isn't me." But the hollow whispered inside him, "It is now." The matriarch bent down, her lips almost brushing his ear. "Say it, child. Say the words, and be free of the weight of who you were." Torres's mouth opened. "Ned." His voice cracked, trembling on the edge of surrender. The family leaned closer, breathless, waiting for him to join, and then a sound cut through the ritual. A boy's scream. Torres snapped his head up. Across the cavern, at the mouth of one of the tunnels, stood the boy who had run with him. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, but his eyes still burned with something no one else in the hollow seemed to have: defiance. "Don't!" the boy shouted. His voice echoed above the chant. "That's how they take you. That's how they took all of them." The family hissed, their heads snapping toward the child. The chant wavered. Torres's chest heaved. He clutched his throat, words choking inside him. His name balanced on the edge of erasure. The boy's voice thundered again, shaking with desperation. "Remember who you are!" The matriarch's grip tightened. Her nails dug into his scalp. "Ignore him," she hissed. "The hollow is your name now. You are nothing but the echo." The family picked up the chant again, louder, trying to drown out the boy's plea. Bones rattled, torches flared, the cavern shuddered. Torres dropped to his knees, torn between the two voices. The matriarch whispering promises of eternal belonging, the boy screaming for him to resist. His mind fractured, the hollow pressing in, his past dissolving. Through the haze, a phrase slipped into his head. Simple, terrifying, a truth the hollow wanted him to accept. And the very words I want you, the reader, to write in the comments twice. The hollow keeps what it takes. The matriarch leaned closer, waiting for him to repeat it. The boy screamed, "Don't say it. If you do, you'll never come back." Torres's lips trembled. Sweat poured down his face. His gun lay at his side, forgotten. His badge was gone. His name teetered on the edge of annihilation. And as the cavern shook, as the hollow pressed its will into his very blood, Michael Torres realized this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about choice. Would he surrender to the chant and become another echo in Copperhead Hollow? Or would he defy it, even if it killed him? The torches flared once more, blinding, and the screen goes black. The cavern shook harder, dust and stone raining from the ceiling. The family's chant swelled until it was no longer sound but pressure, a force pressing against Torres's skull, squeezing his thoughts into pulp. The matriarch's grip on his head was iron. Her voice hissed like steam. "Say it. Give yourself. The hollow keeps what it takes." Torres's lips parted. The words burned on his tongue. For a moment he saw himself surrendering, his body swaying with the family, his voice blending into the chant, peaceful, eternal, a release from fear, from memory, from the endless weight of being Michael Torres. But then, the boy screamed again. "Fight!" His cry was ragged, desperate, cracking with fear, yet it was enough. Something in Torres stirred, the last ember of who he was. He shoved against the matriarch's hand, stumbling backward. The cavern blurred, torches flickering, family snarling. His gun, his useless hollowed gun, gleamed faintly in the dirt. He grabbed it, raised it, and fired. Not at Ezekiel, not at the matriarch, but at the ceiling. The bullet ripped into stone. The cavern roared as rock split and tumbled. Torches shattered, flames guttered. The family shrieked, their chant broken, harmony shattered. The boy bolted toward him. "This way!" Torres stumbled after him, lungs burning, legs weak. The tunnel twisted, walls closing in, bones crunching underfoot. Behind them, the family howled in fury, their footsteps pounding in perfect unison. The tunnel opened into night. Torres burst into the forest, cold air slamming his face. The stars above seemed impossibly bright, too sharp, as if mocking his escape. The boy tugged him forward, deeper into the trees, but the sound followed. The chant, faint at first, then rising. Not from behind, but from everywhere. The trees groaned with it. The wind carried it. The earth itself vibrated with it. Torres stopped, chest heaving. The boy turned, panicked. "Keep running!" Torres shook his head. He could feel it in his bones. There was no leaving Copperhead Hollow, no road that didn't bend back, no mountain path that didn't collapse. The boy hadn't escaped. He had only delayed. The chant grew louder. Shapes moved between the trees, faces grinning in the dark. The boy's voice cracked. "Don't give in, please." Torres dropped the gun. His legs buckled. He sank to his knees, the forest floor damp beneath him. The boy reached for him, but Torres caught his wrist, squeezing with the last of his strength. "Listen to me," Torres rasped, his voice shredded. "You run, you fight, you remember who you are. Don't let them take your name." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I can't leave you." Torres forced a broken smile. "You already did." And then the chant drowned everything. The trees bent inward, the ground shuddered, shadows closed over Torres, swallowing him whole. The last thing he heard was the matriarch's whisper, softer than breath. "The hollow keeps what it takes." The forest stilled. The night was silent again. When the boy looked back, there was no sign of Torres, no footprints, no broken branches, just the endless trees of Copperhead Hollow, standing watch. He ran. Epilogue. Weeks later, hikers reported strange sounds near the mountain. A low hum, like dozens of voices murmuring in unison. Some swore they saw a sheriff's cruiser rusting at the edge of the woods, its lights faintly glowing though the battery was long dead. And those who claimed to listen too closely said the voices whispered a name over and over, tangled with all the others the hollow had taken. Michael Torres, but no record remained of him. His badge never turned up, his case files vanished. Even his name was scrubbed from the sheriff's office roster, as if he had never been born. Because the hollow does not just kill, it erases, and the hollow keeps what it takes.